Hey, everybody, welcome to the Grow Yourself podcast. I'm your host, Kevin McNulty, and this is your personal development school of growth, where each week my guests and I will bring and break down big ideas and practices that will help you learn, grow, and succeed in life. Thanks for checking us out. Now let the growth begin. Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Grow Yourself, where we dive into topics that I hope shape us or help shape us, I should say, that teach us, that push us to grow and be better people and professionals every day. And today we are truly honored to have a remarkable guest, somebody I would say, whose life story really embodies the spirit of courage and leadership. In fact, she wrote a book about it, and we'll tell you about that. And so joining us today is Colonel Kim Casey Campbell. She's a retired U.S. Air Force fighter pilot whose bravery was famously demonstrated when she skillfully landed her damaged aircraft during a combat mission in Iraq, and we will, of course, be asking about that. She's the author of Flying in the Face of Fear, a fighter pilot's lessons on leadership with courage. Kim shares her profound insights and ideas for overcoming adversity, leading with integrity, and some other things. We're going to dive into a few little topics that might surround some of these things. And so today she's here to talk about her journey and the lessons she's learned and how they can inspire us in our daily lives and so forth. So if you will, please welcome Colonel Kim Casey Campbell. Kim, thank you so much for being with us on Grow Yourself.
Absolutely. Thanks so much for having me. It's great to be here, and I'm looking forward to the discussion.
Well, listen, I have been, I don't know you personally, but I've been following you. I feel like I know you because I've been following you on LinkedIn and some other places for a while. And I have watched some of your podcasts, and you just bring some, what I like to say, that both that good personal and professional touch to it. So there's a nice blend there that it resonates with people. And, but you've also got some extraordinary experience in leadership. We'll talk a little bit about that. But listen, if you wouldn't mind, would you just tell the audience a little bit about, who is Kim?
Yeah. I recently retired from the Air Force after 24 years of service. I spent the majority of that time flying A-10s as a fighter pilot or attack pilot. And I also had the opportunity to command some teams as a squadron commander and group commander. I really found that I enjoy those leadership opportunities, just connecting with people, learning from people, helping them on their journey, which was fitting that I finished out my career as the director for the Center for Character and Leadership Development. That's a long title.
Yeah.
At the Air Force Academy. It's a great way to finish out my career at the end of 24 years, coming full circle because I started my career at the Air Force Academy as a cadet. So it was nice to come back and feel like I was giving back in some way and sharing a lot of the lessons that I learned on my own journey, sharing them with the cadets to help them as they move out to be our next generation of aviators and leaders. So that was a great way to close it out. And then it's the, I guess, challenge in some ways of finding our next chapter and our next journey and finding that passion and purpose again. For me, I realized as the director at the Center for Character and Leadership Development that I loved leadership development. I loved helping others on their own leadership journey. And so I decided to become an executive coach. I decided to start sharing these stories and lessons in keynotes and meeting with teams and organizations around the world to share the things that I learned on my journey, and finally decided to put it all in paper, and just recently published a book, as you mentioned, Flying in the Face of Fear. And I think one of the reasons that I wrote that book for me was because of the impact that other people's stories had on my life. In some of the worst of times, like the most difficult moments, I remember those stories. And so it was just, I realized that there's something about the power of sharing stories and lessons to help others on their journey. So I have found my new passion and purpose in life in this next chapter, which is really exciting.
Man, good for you. I mean, because, I think I don't know that the average person understands what it's like to be in the military for 20 plus years. And I don't want to make it, better or worse than some other career or something like this, but in the military, as you very well know, the culture is so strikingly different that, when you talk about getting indoctrinated, I mean, I say this in the best of terms because I believe the military does this right, but they indoctrinate you into this culture of really, in my way of thinking, I served 20 years, that it, really equipping you with all the best of things. So now here you have really an incredible career. You've made it to the pinnacle as a fighter pilot, as a colonel, as a group commander, and all these sorts of things. So what was that like when you got out and decided, oh, where am I?
Yeah, it was a really tough decision for me.
Was it?
It was one that I debated for a long time. In full transparency, I attempted to retire 3 different times. And each time there was something that pulled me back in. The Air Force pulled me back in.
Mhm.
I think my husband was also active duty Air Force. We had 2 young kids. We waited much later in life to have kids, partially because we were deployed so frequently. And so there was this dynamic of now we're group commanders and wing commander and trying to balance that and have a family. It was just we just felt like we weren't doing anything well. And so we kind of
Mm.
got to the point where
Yeah, I
we
get that.
realized the right decision was to retire for our family. And like I said, it took some time for me to get there. So it was a tough decision. And, but in the end, I know this was the right decision. And I think, what I miss is the people, right? I miss that sense of
Yeah.
camaraderie, that sense of teamwork, that sense of passion and purpose. We knew what our mission was. We knew,
Yeah.
we had a team we could count on. And so my concern was trying to find that on the outside. And I have found it. That's the exciting thing. Is it the same? No. But I have found a sense of purpose and passion for what I do. And I've been able to find a great team to do that with. So I
Wow.
think it's hard to make those transitions, whatever they are in life, whether,
Yeah.
Military or not. I think when we do something for so long, one, we get comfortable where it's familiar to us. And so finding that next chapter, that next journey, whatever that is, and it's a little nerve-wracking. We know it's going to be a challenge because it's new and it's different. But honestly, I'm so glad I made the decision. I love the the experience that I had. I won't say that it was all good. I mean, there were ups and downs, certainly, but I learned a lot and it made me who I am today. But I'm really excited for this next chapter, to spend more time with my family. I have a teenager now and an 11-year-old. So it's nice to be home and have a little bit more control over my life.
Yeah, no, that's very cool. May I just ask about maybe for others, be they, let's say, nearing military retirement. By the way, let me back up for just a second, just for our audience to know, because I think mostly civilian audience, that, when you mentioned group commander and wing commander, and explain, I was going to explain, but I think, can you explain this to the group? Because this is moving up into the really upper echelons of an executive on an installation or whatever the case might be. Can you just explain that maybe in terms that our audience could understand what that is, what
Yeah.
those are?
So this at the time, I was a group commander responsible for about 1,000 military and civilian personnel throughout South America, Central America, and the
Mm,
Caribbean. So as you can imagine, I'm stationed in Arizona. I spend a lot of time on the road connecting with my teams, getting out to see them and watch what they're doing, help them in things that they need, meeting with the leadership where they're at. It was a very busy job,
yeah.
as you can imagine. So I was gone probably about 2 weeks per month, different locations. My husband at the time was a wing commander, which meant he was essentially responsible for the entire installation at Davis-Monthan Air Force Base in Arizona. So that entailed a little bit of everything, also working with the local community. The bottom line is we were both very busy.
Yeah,
These were both very
incredibly
high level
busy.
jobs. There just wasn't enough time in the day to get everything done. And at the time, we had kids that were in pre-elementary school and elementary school. And as you can imagine, it was a lot. It was a lot. It was probably the most challenging time in our life as parents, trying to be these commanders and leaders of large teams and also maintain a home front, to
Yeah.
be there for our kids. And the result was that My husband also traveled about a week per month. And so we would make
Wow.
sure that one of us was home with the kids, which meant that sometimes we would see each other in the airport, give each other a high
Yay.
five. um,
Wow.
but it was challenging, but I also, what an incredible opportunity, I think, for both of
Yeah.
us. We learned a lot about ourselves. We learned a lot about each other in terms of our partnership and our marriage. It really focused us to prioritize. Sometimes when there is nothing else you can do, you just have to do it. And so we really figured out how to work our schedule, how to work our timelines, and we asked for help. I mean, there was no
Yeah.
doubt we had help from neighbors, family, friends. We couldn't have done it without them, for sure.
Wow. That's incredible. Yeah. So, and what about for maybe folks who are thinking about getting out of the military, let's say, particularly after, 20 years, do you have some thoughts for them about, you know, going after something that they really, really want? Because we all know in the military, and officer enlisted, I mean, the military controls your life. And even though I thoroughly enjoyed pretty much every year of my 20 years, but I knew that there was something at another level that I needed to go to. And so I was ready to let those shackles off, take those shackles off. So, I mean, just what do you, and a lot of, I would say a lot of military people that I've run into, they really fear going out into the private sector, especially if they spent their entire adult life in the military and going out there. Any just general thoughts or advice for these people, Kim?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, probably the thing that helped me the most, since I said I tried to retire 3 times, is I started
Yeah.
early, right?
Yeah.
I began thinking about it. I began thinking about what I wanted to do. Sometimes, and I will say, from personal experience as well, we go after what's easy. For example, a lot of
Yes.
pilots will go to the airlines. Nothing wrong with the airlines because
Got
it's
it.
easy. It's like the next iteration, and that's fine.
Mhm.
You There are things that drive people. Sometimes it's money, and that is okay. I mean, we understand that that is how we provide a living. It's how we provide for our families. It could be location. For my husband and I, for us, it was the ability to stay together and have control over our lives. So
Yeah.
starting early and figuring out what's out there and not limiting yourself. I'm on the board for the Special Operators Transition Foundation. And one of the things that I see, this is an incredible group of warriors and leaders who have had incredible experiences, done amazing things. And sometimes we sell ourselves short. We don't realize the things that we did in the military have such an impact and can help businesses and organizations and teams. Things that seem second nature to us
Mhm.
really add value. And so I think that's the important thing, is understanding and being able to explain and translate what you did in the military to what you could do in the civilian world. I'm a huge proponent of take your time, think through it, find out, is there something that will bring you, joy, happiness, passion, and purpose, while also balancing that with the amount of money you need to make to provide for yourself or your family or the things that you want to do in life.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's just it, and it's you need to take the time to think about it. Really set yourself up for success, because trying to do that quick, I mean, it's just there are so many things in that transition. Take the time to really think through it, connect with people, talk with people. Don't limit yourself.
Very, very well said. And I couldn't agree with you more that taking that time before you get out to really think it through, because it comes fast and suddenly you're like, oh, I wished I'd have prepared just a little bit more. So now I'm going to put you on the spot here a little bit with an interesting question. You spent 24 years in the Air Force. You were a fighter pilot. You went to war. You were in combat missions. You made it to the upper echelons of executive military service, I guess you could say that. And so now here you are, Kim Casey Campbell. What is your basic philosophy in life?
That's a big question.
It is a big question, and I just thought of it, but I wanted to
Yeah,
know.
I think my basic philosophy probably changes a little bit over time.
Yeah.
Um, I think depending upon where we are in our stages in life, but I think it's about find out what is important to you, find out what truly matters to you, and do that. I think sometimes we
Mm,
get overwhelmed by so many competing priorities and ideas. And I still do. There are moments where I do feel that overwhelm, and I just try to center myself and really think about what is most important, and
Yeah.
how do I focus on that? How do I simplify? That seems to be my word lately. I'm really trying to just simplify and
Mhm.
really focus on the things that are important to me, where I know I can make a difference. It just, otherwise, sometimes there's so much noise. So how do we bring ourselves back to what's most important?
Yeah, boy, that's so well said. There is a lot of noise out there, and spending the time and connecting to what's truly important. And that's, like you said, life will change that philosophy in a heartbeat, but nonetheless, you try to figure that out, and maybe we get in this whirlwind of life and we don't get to think about that. So that's great advice, really. I love that approach to life, that basic philosophy. So, if you would tell us about your experience as a fighter pilot, in particular about what I'm most interested in, probably a lot of our listeners to hear about, that you had a pretty serious engagement over in Iraq, I believe it was, in Baghdad, where you had to. I imagine you draw a lot of maybe even your philosophy in life now from that.
Definitely. um, I since I was 10 years old, I wanted to be a fighter pilot. Like,
Okay.
it was my goal from 10 years old on. This was 1986, by the way. So women weren't actually allowed to be fighter pilots in 1986. I didn't know that. My parents never told me that. They told me to go after what I wanted and work hard. And so that's something that I have kept with me to this day, something I
Mhm.
try to teach my kids as well. But it's, that this was a goal of mine for a very long time.
Wow.
I really wanted to, I love the idea of service and commitment to something bigger and more important than myself. My path I chose was to the Air Force Academy to become that fighter pilot, but it took a long time to get there. And I finished up my A-10 training in 2001, December of 2001. So while in A-10 training, 9/11 happened. And I think for me,
Wow.
that was a huge turning point for the world, really, in terms of, you knew you were, when you train to be a fighter pilot, there's a possibility of combat and war. I think for us after 9/11, we knew it. We knew we were going somewhere. We didn't know when, we didn't know what we were going to be asked to do, but we knew that the world had changed, and our lives as pilots, as Air Force officers, it was drastically going to change. We deployed very quickly just after finishing my A-10 training, we turned around and we went to Afghanistan for a few months. And then very quickly after that, we deployed to Kuwait at first for
Mhm.
Operation Iraqi Freedom. So very quickly after finishing my training, I am now deployed to do two different conflicts, two different um, operations, but doing what I was trained to do, which, for those that are maybe not as familiar about the A-10, it is a
Yeah.
close air support aircraft. We support troops on the ground. So when there are ground troops there, predominantly they're taking fire, they need assistance. We're going to go do everything we can to help them out. The time in Afghanistan was more quiet. There wasn't as much activity and requests for help. We did a lot of convoy escort and just being overhead when the ground troops needed us. Iraq was very different. And so
Mhm.
much so that, well, originally I didn't think I was going to be flying because I was brand new pilot. This was a very more high risk, a lot more threat, but we needed every pilot we could get. And we eventually got to the point where our ground troops made it all the way to Baghdad. And at this point, we were tasked we would fly up to Baghdad, we would air refuel, and then we would just wait. We'd wait for a tasking. And on April 7th, 2003, the mission that you're referring to, that's exactly what we did that day.
Can I stop you just real quick?
Yeah.
Because I really want this context to be in there as you're telling this story. So you were how old at this point?
Oh, let's see.
Mid 20s?
25, 28.
I mean, people need to understand this. You know, 28 years old, you're a fighter pilot in the middle of war. Now, please keep telling the story.
Yeah. Yeah. At the time, married, but no kids. Um, so we had flown up to Baghdad. Unfortunately, the weather was not good. So we actually couldn't see the ground below. We kind of questioned if we were going to be able to do anything, because for us in the A-10 at the time, our technology was that we had to get below the weather. We had to have visual
Mm.
identification of a target and friendly location. based on our technology. So we didn't actually think we were going to be able to do anything. It was kind of one of those days where you think you're going to just turn around and fly home with everything that you're carrying. And then we got a call that our ground troops were taking fire. They needed immediate assistance, and that changed everything. We decided we were going to do everything that we could to get down below that weather. And we got the description of what was happening on the ground. Our troops were over on the west side of the Tigris River, enemies on the east side. They're firing rocket-propelled grenades into our troops. And we're given a target to strike, which is the enemy location, which is underneath a bridge in northern Baghdad. So we plot everything on our maps. At the time, technology, we're physically hand plotting on maps. And we just get over the target area as quickly as we can. And thankfully, we found a hole in the clouds. My flight lead went in first.
Oh, wow.
And then says, all right, Casey, it's your turn. And I remember just kind of looking down, keep in mind above the weather, like it's calm. It's relatively peaceful. And then dropping below the weather and just instantly seeing this firefight. I mean, there were bright flashes and smoke and tracers. It was just all of a sudden, it was like from calm to chaos. And it's that half second of realization of now we're in this really challenging, threatening situation. Our ground troops are taking fire, so we're trying to get in as fast as we can and make things happen. And then I just remember these like puffs of gray and white smoke and then bright flashes in the air next to my cockpit. And it's the sudden realization is not only is there this firefight happening back and forth across the river, but now the enemy sees us and they're shooting up at us.
Me. Yeah.
Yeah. So suddenly it's even more high threat.
Gosh.
So we decide we're going to do just a few passes, try to take the pressure off our friendlies, and then climb up, reassess, get our energy back and come back in. And we do a couple passes of forward firing, so gun and rocket to get underneath the bridge. And my last pass coming off target, like we always do, pulling away from the ground, away from the threat, just trying to get altitude and airspeed back. And then I just feel and hear this loud explosion at the back of the airplane. And I know immediately I'm hit. There is no doubt in my mind. I mean, the jet really like kind of dumps over. I see Baghdad below, and my natural reaction is just pull back on the control stick, which I do, but then nothing happens. Like the jet doesn't move, and I'm plunging to the ground. So now time really felt like it stood still a little bit, like it slowed down. I mean, I remember like seeing the Tigris River, like it's getting closer. I'm trying to, I'm thinking through everything. I remember looking down at my ejection handles and thinking, that is not what I want to do. And then it's kind of just the fallback on training. And I immediately like start assessing things. I've got this flashing master caution light. I look down at a control panel, which is over at my side. It's got lights on everywhere. I glance up at the top and I see the lights that I'm maybe not expecting to see or not hoping not to see, which is all 4 hydraulic lights, pressure and reservoir, both sides. All the lights are on. I glance up quickly at the gauges, and both the left and right side hydraulics are at 0.
And that means
what allow us to fly the airplane.
Got it. This is what, allows you to, maneuver and just about everything.
Yes. So seeing those at 0, I know at this point, my 2 options, one is not good because one is pulling the ejection handles, which that's about the last thing, that I want to do is end up in a parachute, potentially down over the enemy location. And so I know my only option really is at this point to try to get this airplane in its backup emergency system, which allows us to fly the airplane without hydraulics in manual mode. It's called manual reversion. It is just a switch. I mean, it's not a hard thing to do, but you hope that it works, right?
It's going to work. Yeah.
Because at this point, nothing else is working. So I'm just hoping that it works, and thankfully flip that switch and the jet starts to climb up and away from Baghdad. And that's kind of the first moment I'm like, okay, like deep breath. I might actually get out of here alive.
Oh my goodness gracious. I actually did not know they had that sort of backup scenario there, but in any event, so may I just ask about your, do you actually, what really fascinates me were 2 pieces when you said you went down in the hole, in through the weather. And then when you saw the firefight, and then you saw these flashes around you, what does what goes through a 28-year-old woman's mind, anybody's mind,
Yeah.
but it's striking that you're that young. I mean, do you recall what your mind was going through your head? I mean, that's
Yeah. I think first off, I mean, I think when you get that call that ground troops are taking fire, there's a troops in contact, like it almost flips the switch of like the severity of the situation. This is what you
yeah,
trained to do. You're going to do everything in your power. I will say that moment of like watching my flight lead disappear through the clouds. And then it's like, all right, like it's pressure's on, like it is time to perform. You have to, like, everything that you've trained to do, now is the time, and don't screw it up. It's like
yeah,
pressure's on. The ground troops are counting on you. Like, go do your job. Like that's kind of what it was like. There was no doubt in my mind. I mean, we were going to go do this. We were going to do everything we could, which I think any A-10 pilot will tell you that.
absolutely.
Um, seeing those flashes of smoke and or flashes and kind of smoke in the air, it's almost like it's surreal, right? It's like all the stuff that you train for, you talk about, you plan for. I mean, we had done like red flag and green flag missions, which are these massive exercises where you try to simulate war. You simulate getting shot at, but there's nothing quite like the real thing to actually see it. So there's this, I mean, and I think a half second of like this surreal moment. And then it's just like,
Gosh, yeah,
get it's just like a half second. And then you're like, all right, we
yeah.
have a job to do. Let's go do it. But yeah, I mean, I think, and the reason I remember these things, I mean, it's been 21 years. I wrote a journal, that the night after this. So I have all kind of my thoughts,
Oh,
and I
goodness.
still have the audio from the mission. So I, have listened into some of that. I'm not always talking, but it's just, some of the things surprise me now looking back, like at that young age, how calm I was. I mean, I could tell that I was scared. I mean, I can hear the fear in my voice when I say 2 got hit. Like, I was definitely terrified, but I didn't think about the fear. I thought about action. I thought about doing my job. I thought about survival. Um, so, I just think you hope whatever that moment is in your life, that you've done the work, you put in the work to be ready, so that when that moment comes, you're ready for it and you overcome your fear. You have the ability to take action because you've put in the work in advance.
I was going to ask about later on about, about uh, people building confidence. I'm a coach like you, and I coach, managers and executives as well. And it's not that uncommon, as I'm sure you're well known, that sometimes when you ask, a, a manager or even an executive, particularly if they're new, so how do I build my confidence level? And there's not the greatest answer in the world for that. One of my answers is, jump in and do it, but I mean, there's just no way to build better confidence than actually do it, succeed or fail and come back and do it again, or whatever the case might be. But how did you do that? Was it purely being completely trained and ready for this moment, or were there activities or things that you did to build this mental toughness, this ability to just, and again, you talk about in your book and you've said it here, this is not about, not having fear. If you don't have fear, I think there's something wrong with you. It's a question of, and what was it you that said it, that you want to triumph over fear as opposed to win or something like this, but in any overcome fear. How
Yeah.
did you learn to do that?
I think for me, and I've had the opportunity now to reflect kind of on this experience,
Sure.
and how did I get there? How at 28 years old, how with not a ton of experience in the airplane, did I have the confidence to keep going in that moment? And part of it was survival, certainly. How did I have the confidence to make the decision to ultimately go and try to land this airplane? But I think if we talk about just that moment, for me, confidence comes with competence. So the more competent I am,
Mm,
the more confident I become. So that to me that's why we have to put in the work. Like, that's why we have to put in the work. And
yeah.
I talked to this I talk to CEOs about this. I talk to my kids about this, right? Like, if we want something to happen and we want us to be able to overcome fear and stress and challenge, we have to put in the work. So for me, and I've looked back and kind of thought through this, right, is there's preparation, there is book work, there's reviewing lessons learned, there's studying, depending upon what you're going to do. But there's the preparation that has to go into this. It's seeking out lessons learned, talking to other people, reviewing material, reviewing, in my case, studying aircraft systems, studying enemy's threat systems. There is preparation that has to go in. But then there's that next step, which is practice. And that's either through, for us in the A-10 and in flying communities, simulators are a great way to practice before you actually go fly an airplane. In reality, we also have visualization, some way to practice, some way. We use chair flying, which was visualization. You sit in a chair and you think about being in the cockpit.
Oh, wow.
You go through the steps.
Oh, wow.
And you think about the radio calls, the things that you are going to do and say and act. That's practice. That's a visualization. I do it today. And then for me, that last step is kind of that planning for contingencies. So you practice like you want things to go, but you also think about the contingencies. What could go wrong? Not just overthinking what could go wrong, but what will you actually do in those moments? How will you respond? We plan for contingencies. We talked about battle damage in our pre-brief. I personally had thought about worst case scenarios, but I think in life, if we think through the contingencies a little bit, and we kind of go, okay, here's how I will respond. Here's what I'll do. Then I'm like, let it go. You've thought through it. You have a plan. Now let it go. Don't worry about it and focus on, going out and getting it done. I think all those things for me, like even today, if I start feeling overwhelmed or nervous or worried, I go back to those three things. I prepare, I practice, I plan for contingencies.
Prepare, practice. What was it?
Prepare, practice, plan for contingencies.
Plan for contingencies. Did you actually think about, I guess you're saying it here, but did you have a contingency if you had to, eject in the middle of bad guy?
We have, it's a contingency that we're required to have. We talked about it. We have our survival and evasion instructors before we go fly a mission in whatever theater we're flying in. We learn about best places to go, actions to take, things that will help, things that won't help. You have a kit that you wear. There's all those things that contingencies have been put into place. Now, I will tell you, I think most of us think that will never happen to us.
Right.
And then,
mistake.
And then it does, right? So you have to be ready for that. We talked about getting hit with battle damage. I had thought about it, but we're kind of young and invincible. And we think, well, that won't happen to me. And then it does. And then you have to do what you've been trained to do.
I can't help it if I think my last guest even brought this up, but the old Mike Tyson quote that, everybody has a plan until you get punched in the face. And,
yep.
and yeah, boy, that's crazy. You mentioned about this idea, Kim, that you can't have courage without fear. Explain that.
I think sometimes we're really hard on ourselves when we feel fear or doubt or worry. We just criticize ourselves for feeling that way. Well, who cares, right? That's a normal human reaction. But now you got to do something with it. So it's this whole idea, don't worry about the fear, right? Take action in that moment. You want to be courageous and brave. It requires fear to get there and overcoming that fear. That's the whole point. I think sometimes we're hard on ourselves, whether it's it's not just about life or death situations, right? It's this, specifically for me, talking about leadership, it's right. It's fear of failure. It's fear of not meeting expectations, fear of change, fear of the unknown. I could go on and on and on because there's many. That's normal. We face these fears. We face doubts. We face worry. We face stress. We sometimes don't think we're good enough. We worry about how we're going to perform. Well, okay, that's normal. But now you have to have a plan to deal with it and to take action. And that is what courage is about. I think it is about stepping up to act in the face of fear, right? It's having the doubts, the worries, nerves and doing it anyway. And I think that relates to sports. It relates to school for, young kids as well. It relates to CEOs. Like, it is okay to have doubts, worries, and fear, but you need to be prepared. You need to put in the work to do something about it.
Wow, and you just said it just a moment ago so beautifully, and I wrote these down, and I hope audience members will not forget this: practice, preparation, prepare, practice, and plan for contingency, because you you can't move beyond the fear if you don't have those things behind you, right? You're kind of like, well, I'm afraid because I don't know what I'm doing. Well, what you're saying is that, yeah, I'm afraid, but I know what I'm doing. So now I have to trust all of those things. That I remember listening to if you're familiar with tennis at all, Roger Federer. He, just really, one of the goats for sure. But he talked during an interview. He said that, when I would get into a Grand Slam tournament or something like this, or let's just really a tough situation, when I knew I was playing somebody really tough or something like this. He said my coaches, especially at the beginning of my career, would say, "Listen, you've been training for 15 years now, starting as a kid, or maybe even 20." He said, "So now all of that stuff that you have trained upon and gotten really good at and excelled at," he said, "now go on the court and forget about it all." Using the idea of, I think of what you're saying is just let it happen. Just trust yourself, work through that fear, and suddenly you will see all of these things come to fruition, all of this work and this preparation and so forth. Yes.
Yeah. I mean, I remind myself of that these days when I get up on stage to do a keynote
Yeah.
speech. Like, I've put in the work, I've rehearsed, I've practiced, I've thought about those contingencies, but in the moment when I get up on stage, it is all about be in the moment, share the story. You've put in the work. Now just connect with the audience, be with them, and I think that's really with anything, right? You've done the work, trust yourself, trust the work you've put in, be in the moment, take it all in, and take action.
Wow. I love that. I really do. I can recall, and I'm a speaker as well, and that sometimes I would try too hard, especially at the beginning. It took me a while to just say, "Kevin, just listen, you've been doing this for years. I mean, you're ready. You've put in the work, like you said. Just get out there and let it go." And I think you said it. Just be in the moment, and all of this stuff will come. But if you tie your head up, your mind up, and just put a sort of a big brake comes on, then it goes nowhere fast. You'll still react to the training and the preparation, but there's something different about saying, I don't know. Uh, I was actually thinking about, Kim, when you were talking about going down through the clouds, I started thinking about the Star Wars, especially the first movie. And it was kind of like, we're going in and let the force be with you, right? Just, man, you've got it all right here.
Yeah. That's the moment of like, I mean, I was definitely like nervous about what I was about to see and what I was about to do. I mean, don't get me wrong. Like, you can prepare, you practice, you plan for contingencies. You can still be nervous. Like,
Yes,
that's,
100%.
but then you go do it, and you trust your training, you trust your preparation. And, that moment of diving through the weather was definitely scary. It helped that my flight lead went first, right? I had someone
Right.
there that was by my side. I wasn't alone. But also knowing that I had put in the work, I was ready for this. This was the moment, like, now or never, go do it.
I literally, and I'm being very sincere here, I'm almost like it's listening to you talk about that, and especially when you said it the first time about going down through the clouds. I felt like I literally felt the same feeling of going on a roller coaster and hitting that. I mean, I'm almost out of breath thinking about what you're saying, how that you must have went, and it's just
Here it goes.
here it goes, and no turning back.
Yeah.
So now I want to put you on the spot again here. Let me just check our time here. About your philosophy again, but now do you have some central principles or philosophy that when it comes to leadership and teaching, and some thoughts about this?
I think,
And maybe you've
the
said them
biggest,
already. Yeah.
yeah, I mean, I think the biggest thing with leadership is a reminder for all leaders that we never stop growing or learning.
Mm.
My final year in the Air Force, I
Mm.
was surrounded by this amazing team at the Center for Character and Leadership Development. These are people with PhDs that have studied this. These are leaders who have practiced it. These are people that are passionate about what they do. And I felt like I learned so much from them at this final pinnacle of my career in the Air Force. I felt like I was like soaking it all in, being surrounded by these incredible people and learning from the young cadets as well, who are just
Wow.
starting on their journey, like listening to them and learning from them and hearing their perspective. So I think that's probably the biggest thing. And I think, the other piece to this is there's no one right way. Right. In my book, I have these considerations for leaders at the end of each chapter. And I will tell you, I was so nervous about putting those in there because I never wanted anyone to think about like, this was the prescription. Like, this is
Yeah.
here's your recipe
Yeah.
for leadership success. I didn't feel like that at all. It worked for me, but these are things that you consider. These are things that you take in based on your experience and the things that you've done in your life and your role as a leader. But I think that's important, is that we consider different perspectives. We try to find those unique perspectives that are a little different than our own. I think, I try to, now at this stage in my life, I try to read different books that are still about leadership because I'm passionate about it, but they're from a different perspective. I'm reading a book right now called Legacy about the New Zealand All Blacks and how leadership was, how they think about leadership from a rugby perspective. I just think it all ties in. There's so much we can learn from each other if our mind is open, if our heart is open, if we're willing to learn and grow.
And what would you say to young aspiring leaders? And I want to kind of, for those who are listening to it, we can have leadership roles in a lot of different ways. It's not just in the professional realm or at your job or something like this. So in broadening this idea of somebody who is moving into, or thinking about leadership, what are your thoughts to them? What maybe is like the number one thing or two things that would, set them up to succeed as a leader?
Yeah. And I think you touched on some of it there in terms of, you can lead a large team, you can lead a small team, you could lead your family, you could lead yourself. Like, leadership is, to me, it's a very broad term, and it doesn't have to be an official title.
Right.
I think it's important to recognize that we're not always going to get it right. We're going to make mistakes. We're going to have failures on our leadership journey. And I think can you learn from each one? Can you do it better the next time? Can you take in those lessons and continue to do it better, continue to learn and grow? And I also think, consistent with what I've hopefully been saying all along, like, you're going to face challenges, right? You're going to face things where you have doubt, you have worry, you're not sure you're doing it right. And the reality is that it's all about acting with courage in those moments. It is about making hard decisions when you don't have perfect information. It is about connecting with your team on a human level, like getting to know them, admitting you don't have all the answers, asking them for ideas.
I
It's
love that.
making a bad decision and then owning it. It all takes courage. It's not an easy path. Again, whether you're leading a large team or a small team, a family, like being a parent is one of the hardest things I've ever done.
Mm-hmm.
It is all about taking action in that moment, facing your fears, doing it anyway, and leading with courage.
And of course, what you're saying applies to anyone, anywhere approaching leadership. May I ask, is there something, I don't know if we've worked our way out of this scenario. I was in the Air Force when many jobs started opening up to women,
Mm-hmm.
so I don't, and I don't know, where we're at in our society. I can tell you from my perspective, but are there things that you would say, or one thing you would say that might be slightly different for a woman moving into a leadership position, perhaps moving into a male-dominated environment, and some of these sorts of things? Any thoughts about that, Kim?
Yeah, it's interesting. I've thought about this, and I think my advice, I'll say it, is what I would give for women, but I think it's the same advice that I would give for men, right? If you're
Okay.
going into a new leadership position, especially one where maybe you're a minority, but no matter what, you need to put in the work, right? You need to be ready for it. Like, put in the work. do the work, and then trust that you've done the work, and be confident in yourself that you've put in the work, you've had the training, you are selected for the position because of your background, your skills, everything that you bring to the table, and then go do the work. It's sometimes we overthink, and I say this as an overthinker myself. But it really is about putting in the work, knowing it's not always going to go as planned. You are going to make mistakes. You're going to have difficult moments, and people are watching. They want to see how you respond in those moments. Do you get back up again? Do you, can you be honest and act with integrity? And how will you respond in those difficult scenarios? But I think I say that's my advice to women. It's also my advice for men. Anyone going into a new leadership role needs to put in the work.
Yeah. And that may be in part, certainly there could be some cultural issues in terms of how, let's just say again, if we're talking about a male-dominated environment, maybe how the culture receives you. But then there's also the part about your own head. The difference might be how a man stepping into a male-dominated environment would react different than a woman stepping in. I mean, some of it is your head, maybe about what you think they're thinking.
Yeah. Well, in my position, walking into a fighter squadron for the first time, like, I put a lot of pressure on myself. I mean, I was worried that if I made mistakes, if I failed, if I did something wrong, then I was going to ruin it for the women that followed me. Like, that's a lot of pressure.
That's a lot of pressure.
But that's pressure I put on myself. The reality was that I had this incredible squadron of teammates who turned out to be my brothers. What they wanted from me was to see credibility in the airplane. They wanted to see that I was credible and capable. The reality is they want to see that from any new wingman, any new person in a unit. They kind of want to see how you're going to do. Now, I get it. It is a little bit different. For me, being the only woman, a lot of that was they just didn't know how to react or respond or what was okay. And, so we're all learning, and I'm giving feedback as best I can. But, I think proving your credibility and capability goes a long way to being accepted in any organization, because that's what people want. They want to see that you're credible and capable and can do the job. And I had an incredible experience with, we deployed very quickly after that, and I proved myself in combat. So I think for me, I just had such a great experience and a positive experience being in this very male dominated environment. But I think a lot of that was, I put in the work. I worked harder. I spent a lot of time studying. I did the work. I proved myself in the airplane, and I proved that I could work and be part of a team just like everybody else.
Gosh, I just love the way that you put that. I mean, it's really so well stated, and I must say that, particularly as an enlisted guy, it was well known that fighter pilots are a bit cocky. And so, so my question to you though is, I even might be a dumb question, but did you have to manage that cockiness with humility? I mean, you need both of those, right? And to some degree, I mean, you can't be a wimp and go into a fighter jet. And
I think there's a difference between cocky and confident, right?
Well, I would agree with that.
I think sometimes cocky is like this negative perspective of how do you treat other people as well. So to me, it's confidence. For sure, you need confidence that you've put in the work, that you're ready to go do some really hard things. But there is a sense of cockiness and swagger, I guess, that you can call it, that goes with it. But to me, like, there is that, right? I get that generality. But the Air Force Weapons School teaches to the weapons school instructors that the best instructors out there are humble, approachable, and credible.
Interesting. I'll be
right.
darned.
So they're teaching humility at what used to be Air Force Fighter Weapons School. It's now Air Force Weapons School, but we're teaching fighter pilots humility, right? So this idea that if you want to be a good instructor, you need to be humble. You need to be able to admit mistakes so that because others are watching. You need to be approachable so people will come ask you questions, and you need to be good about what you do. So
you just gave a lesson in leadership right there in about 5 seconds. That was so beautifully said. And I know we're running out of time here. May I just ask, what can, and I could go on for a couple of hours about this, but what can civilian leaders learn from military leaders?
I think there's a lot of things that we can learn from each other, right?
Sure.
Hearing that different perspective.
Yeah.
I think sometimes we even the military, right? We sometimes reach out to civilian or industry because we're looking for that just a little spark, right? Something a little bit different. I've been doing it this way for so long. We're doing pretty well, actually. How can I do it better? Right? It's that idea of just pulling in a different perspective. I think the military and military leaders are very good about bringing teams together and keeping teams together. It's this sense of camaraderie and mission and purpose. We know how to solve complex problems. We know how to make decisions without perfect information. Not saying that civilian leaders don't do that, but we've seen it from a different perspective. So again, I think it's about pulling lessons learned, pulling ideas together to find that unique perspective, to find that spark that works for you.
Wow, that's powerful. I told you that for about half my career, I was in military equal opportunity. And, and I remember when I got out, started doing some work in diversity, talking about diversity and inclusion and all these other sorts of things. And boy, has that changed just a minute. But in any event, I remember being very nervous about approaching civilians with my understanding of, as we call it now, diversity and inclusion. We call it equal opportunity treatment, human relations, these sorts of things that you're well know. But I remember after my first few talks, whether it was a workshop or a keynote, people coming up and saying, I've never quite heard it that way. And I said, well, what was different about it? They said, you're making these ideas connect to the mission. And I was like, for us, it wasn't like the human side was not important, but you as a commander of a squadron, simply put, if you had your people fighting and bullying and whatever comes with, discrimination and prejudice, whatever comes with that, for them to be focused on that rather than saving the warfighter's ass, that's a problem. And people would be like, it's not like we don't think about it, but there's a real logical, rational business decision behind how you treat people. I mean, so I'm just saying that, I'm just echoing your idea about how the paradigms and the perspectives are so different. And if you don't go out and get that, you're just going to, you're stuck in your own head, I guess you could say. So,
yeah. No, I just quickly, I'll just say,
please.
I think it's all about, it kind of goes back to Simon Sinek's idea, right? Of start with why. What's the why? What's the purpose? What's the common purpose to focus on? And I think if we can center up on that, why are we talking about diversity and inclusion? Well, let's focus on what the mission, the purpose, our common purpose, and how it impacts that. I think that can be said to about anything. It's about when you're making changes in an organization, when you're, doing something new and there's some kickback. Well, how about we start with why we're making the changes, the impact it will have. And so I think it really does center on that common purpose and mission.
Well, listen, I'm just thinking, that things have changed so much in that realm that it's a little frustrating for me that we've taken our eye off the ball when it comes to these sorts of things. But that's a whole nother subject right there that you and I, especially your work in the Center for Character Development and so forth, you could chime in on a lot. But let me just ask, can you please share about your book? Maybe tell us a little bit about it. I know we're short, we're over time here actually, but tell us about your book. Tell us about you and where people can find you and the type of work, who should hire you, any of that. I mean, it's just go for it, Kim.
Yeah, no, that's great. I think, I always say, I just feel like, we get short on time in these podcasts and these conversations. And so I'm happy for people to reach out if they have follow-up questions or things that we didn't cover that you would like us, would you like me to follow up on? But the best place is to find me at my website, which is kim-kc-campbell.com, because it's got links to all the social media, email, and information about my book, which is Flying in the Face of Fear, A Fighter Pilot's Lessons on Leading with Courage. It's been out for a year now, and it's been really exciting just to see the feedback and to hear the impact that the book has made. I think when we write a book, we never really know how it will connect with people. We have these hopes and dreams, But it's been so rewarding to hear from people who have read the book. And we're talking, from senior leaders to new emerging leaders. I love hearing the feedback and just how it made an impact with them. And, like I said, I wrote the book because I think it's important that we share our stories and the lessons learned. And for me, these were kind of the most important lessons I learned over my 24 years of service and beyond. Now that I'm doing some keynote speaking, executive coaching, like I said, I'm still learning along the way. So, I appreciate the conversation, and I hope that people will reach out if they have follow-up questions.
Yeah. And I don't think, anybody listening, will quickly gather, what you bring to the table here. But I will echo that or just reiterate this notion of what you've accomplished, in your military career. Let me emphasize that, Kim Casey Campbell, I guarantee, even though you don't know her personally, brings the goods. And, if you really want to learn about leadership and character development, I think going to a person like you is just exactly the place to be. By the way, I heard, but I'm going to ask about KC. Where did KC come from? It's not Kim Campbell, right?
I mean, every pilot gets a call sign. Every fighter pilot gets a call sign, right? It's a rite of passage, but it actually comes when we are officially designated as combat mission ready. So we've been checked out. We've had the training. At this point, we're ready to deploy to combat. We all get a call sign. It generally happens on a Friday night. It's a pretty fun festivities, but we're not in the room when they talk about us or come up with ideas for our call sign. But I remember very clearly coming back into the room, and they said, well, your new call sign is KC. And I was like, that's really lame. I didn't say that out loud.
That's not original.
I was like, well, that's my initials,
Yeah.
And they said, no, it stands for killer chick. And I'm like, all right, well, that's fitting. So
love it. Love it. Well, listen, all of the things that you talked about will be in the show notes so people can find you and just click on a link and go there. But I just can't thank you enough for, you talk about all the hard work, and it's apparent all the hard work that you've put in. And now you've come here for an hour and shared all that hard work with us. And I'm so grateful to you.
Absolutely. Thanks so much. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. I don't salute many people, but I'm going to salute you.
Thank
Okay.
you.
God bless and take care.